we became a state regional planning commission, or council of governments, as most of us are known. There are 24 of us around the state. We are one of the 4 totally rural regions. Of those 24 COGs, or state planning regions, they all have rural elements. HGAC is the Houston Galveston Area Council. That's our neighbor to the south. Well, that's Houston, but it's also rural counties surrounding Houston and Harris County. CAPCOG is the Capital Area Council of Governments in Austin. That's Austin and Round Rock and San Marcos, but it's also rural communities surrounding those. So 20 of our 24 regions of the state have an urban center surrounded by rural communities. Only 4 of us are totally rural. Now, I grew up in Corrigan. If you happen to know where Corrigan is, if you came up from the south, you passed it on the way up here today. To me, Lufkin's a big city. Nacogdoches is a big city, but under no definition in Austin or Washington do Lufkin or Nacogdoches reach the definition of urban center. Honestly, and I love it here, and I think that's why I love it, there are large, small towns. We're very blessed to have them here and have all the resources here, but this is not urban Texas, this is rural Texas. Those other regions gain some benefit, the rural communities in them gain some benefit from having that large urban center. It brings more resources to their region. Because we are totally rural, things seem to impact us a little more when we talk about rural issues. It affects everybody in Deep East Texas, not just some of our folks who live in the outlying areas. But I thought about asking the OJs to come in and sing that song, Money, 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 but I couldn't get them this morning, so I just created a slide that shows money. Tourism is money, and I want to jump right to it because, that's okay, I can go here. Some key points I want to make, and this is not a typo. The first one is listed twice because it's so important. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we all have to remember that there are folks back in our communities and throughout our region that don't understand this. And so part of what we have to do is be an educational arm 24/7. Because I learned a long time ago, no matter what you're talking about, you have to sell the need before you can sell the solution. And we're not going to be successful in our tourism efforts unless we engage our whole communities, our whole region. And so we have to be able to sell to them why it's important. Tourism is economic development. I come from a rural background where too many people have the attitude of, they're wasting money on tourism, what they need is more jobs around here. And they don't seem to understand how tourism creates jobs, not only in the tourism industry, which is big in its own self, but I'm here to tell you that the same things that draw tourists to your community will draw new industry to your community. We live in a day and a time where every little community now, Nacogdoches being an exception, but there's still a very vibrant economic development organization here. They don't have advantage of that half-cent sales tax, but most of our communities have a half-cent sales tax, and so they have money readily available to go out and recruit new jobs, new industries, desirable companies to expand or relocate or build in their communities. And so if I've got a company, and let's say I'm going to create a new company with 50 jobs or 100 jobs, I can put that company anywhere I want to go in the state of Texas, and I can go sit down with the local community and I can negotiate incentives, whether it be tax incentives or cash incentives or have utilities provided to me based on the number of jobs I create. I can get that deal anywhere I want to go in Texas. So what it has come down to is now, where do I really want to go? And if my worthless son-in-law is going to be the one that I'm going to put in there and let him run that new company, it's going to be, where does that worthless son-in-law want to live? And so places like Crockett are competing with places like Fredericksburg. I live in Crockett, I've lived there now for 45 plus years, I've been telling folks in Crockett for 45 years, we could be the next Fredericksburg. A few of them get it, too many of them don't. But that's the type of impact that tourism can have on our economies. Regional cooperation is important. It was just stated a while ago. Most people don't fly into Nacogdoches or fly into Lufkin. They drive in here, and so they go through multiple parts of our region on their way here and on the way out. And some of the smaller towns are some of the biggest draws. You know, we're right here. I tell people we are a rural region, but we're not a remote region. We're not out in the middle of nowhere. We're right here. The southern end of our region is 50 miles from downtown Houston. We're in a wonderful location for lots of things, including day trips and recreational tourism and historic tourism. And people, they will come for things that you and I take for granted in our local communities. The key is we've got to develop, we need local strategies, local marketing campaigns, but we also need regional strategies so that when someone comes up here to see the historic district in downtown San Augustine, they're going to make it a point that they're also going to come over to Nacogdoches. And maybe they're going to go to Crockett and see a show. You know, we've got a wonderful fine arts organization over there that brings all sorts of entertainment to town that people just marvel at how those people come to Crockett, Texas. And we've got a little place called Camp Street where people like Michael, it holds about 30 people and it's full, but people like Michael Martin Murphy come there and perform. There are hidden assets all over our region, and we've got to work cooperatively. I've already seen, good thing I started early because I know I'm going to do my best. You just cut me off when it's time for me to stop. City-county cooperation is vital. Here's the one point I'll make on that. I used to be a county judge. I lived in Austin 5 years, but I still called Crockett home and maintained my permanent residence there. But I have seen and I have been to all 254 counties in the state of Texas. That used to be my job with the Texas Association of Counties. I was hired to create a new effort called the County Relations Office, and my instructions were get out there and help counties and help them find the resources they need and make sure nobody's going without. And so over a 4-year period, I spent a day or the better part of a day in every single county in Texas. And most of these are very rural counties, and a lot of them are pretty remote by our standards. But I have seen over and over and over, when the local city and the local county leaders work together, that community thrives, whether it be tourism or other forms of economic development or just life in general. But we have too many, and I'm not going to point any fingers or call any names. I'm just going to say this is an issue in some places. We have too many communities where the city leaders and the county leaders are not on the same page for whatever reason. So that's important, and that's something to kind of look out for. And when you find a place, I'm going to use Sabine County as a great example. The county and city of Hemphill over there work together on just about everything, and they've been very successful in economic development activities because of that. Funding is available from a variety of sources. We're going to talk about some of those, and then later I'm going to talk about connecting your dots, and I'll come back to that. Again, this is DETCOG. We are an economic development district under the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration. One of the things that we're required to do as such is every 5 years develop a comprehensive economic development strategy for our region. It's known as CEDS for short. It's on our website if you care to look at it. But I brought this up because one of the key goals in our CEDS, which we did, our current CEDS is 2020 to 2025, and we updated along the way in between. But one of the big goals is tourism, outdoor recreation, and ecotourism. And I'm not going to try to read this to you, but it's really important to our region. And all the stakeholders that came together from the region who talked about what are the important things we need to be focusing on, this was one of their top goals, to promote and improve tourism in our region. Part of that SEDS is a SWOT analysis, and look at this is all the strengths that were identified in our SWOT analysis for the region. Almost every one of these can be tied to tourism in DP's Texas. So it is important. And by the way, I made some notes, and so I'm looking at my notes on my phone. I'm not trying to be just, the leisure and hospitality industry in our region for the third quarter of 2021 accounted for 10.5% of all jobs. Now that's already a significant number. It could be a lot more and a lot bigger, but it's already big business and people don't realize it. I want to talk about some funding partners. I'm just going to mention the governor's office because I know they're going to be here, or maybe already here. They're already here, and so I won't try to steal any thunder there. But I also want to point out, she works for the governor's Economic Development and Tourism Office. Just the fact that that's what they call that whole operation lets you know that tourism is an important part of economic development. Texas Department of Agriculture, they've got grant programs that we often overlook. One of them is our Texas Community Development Fund, and this is what we call CDBG, and in rural communities in our region, probably 8 or 10 grants will be awarded. It's a 2-year cycle, so every cycle we'll get 8 or 10, maybe if we're lucky 12 or more grants in DP's Texas. Most of these go to traditional infrastructure projects like water, sewer, wastewater, street drainage. However, eligible activities include historic preservation, parks and recreation facilities, parking facilities, sidewalks. So there's opportunity here for something that our communities typically use for other purposes that can create funding to improve our tourism assets in the region. Here's another program, the Downtown Revitalization Program, which is CDBG funded. It's under the Texas Department of Agriculture, and they've got an application deadline coming up July 8th. You can get up to $500,000 in that grant program. And then this Planning Capacity Building Fund, you know, if you don't have a plan, we all need a plan before we get started. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels and wasting money. So the first step for some of our communities may be going after this $75,000 Planning and Capacity Building Fund to help get a roadmap for what our community needs to do so we can go after some other projects and make a dent in things. I'm a big supporter of the Texas Historical Commission and all of our county historical commissions around the state. I told you I've traveled to all 254 counties in Texas. 70 of them have already fully restored their courthouses. They are works of art and works of beauty. We didn't build courthouses 100 years ago like we build things today. In fact, I hate to think what would happen if all our courthouses burned down tonight. I'm afraid half of them might be rebuilt as metal buildings or something. But 100 years ago plus, they built buildings that they were proud of, that were community institutions. And this courthouse restoration program, preservation program from the THC, helps counties and communities restore. Now, if you look at our region, I'm pretty loud, so I think I can walk over here. You know, I just did a little snapshot of DP's Texas. We have completed courthouses in Trinity County, which is Grofton, St. Augustine, and Newton, and if you hadn't been in them, they're beautiful. We have planning grants that have been completed in Houston County, Crockett, Polk County, Livingston, and Tyler County, Woodville. These other counties are not in the process yet. In fact, I may be wrong, but I think Polk County just got funded for their actual restoration project, and which is the next step. I've seen county seats across the state of Texas totally revitalized with the courthouse being the first big piece of the puzzle. It's amazing once that county courthouse gets restored and revitalized. Number one, I challenge you to go visit some of these. You won't be able to tell, this program's been going on for probably 15 years. You won't be able to tell if this courthouse was restored last year or 15 years ago. Once they come back And it's not a simple process and it's not a cheap process, but once we get them back, the people are so proud of these facilities that we are taking care of them like they were never cared for before. And the whole community joins in that pride, and this can transform a rural community, particularly anywhere in the state of Texas. Also, you probably can't, maybe you can get a picture, I'm sure you can get a copy of this presentation later, but if you look at the Texas Historical Commission website, they've got one of the best links I have seen for grant resources. And there are there's tons of good information on there, not just their programs, but other resources from other agencies as well. Am I doing terrible on time so far?
You're good.
Remember, I started 10 minutes early. Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. We don't often think about them, but they're a sort, and again, we live in an area with all these natural resources. This is a natural for Deep East Texas to build up our recreational facilities and resources. They have these are all different grant programs under Parks and Wildlife Department. A recreational trails grant, a local parks grant program, boating access grants, target range grants, they call this last one co-op, Community Outdoor Recreation Outreach Program. And I'll just give you a few examples of projects that have been completed with grants that I just mentioned from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. I don't even remember where this one is, but this is a beautiful outdoor amphitheater park setting. This is actually McAllen. This is a complex of lighted ball fields. Now, I got grandkids who play softball and baseball, and we will go and spend a weekend somewhere. A granddaughter this past weekend, I fortunately had something else to do, so I didn't have to go, but my wife did. And they played 6 ball games in 2 days in Gladewater, Texas. This is big business when you get these ball teams coming into your town for a weekend. They bring a ton of business and spend a ton of money. Boat ramps, I mean, look at the lakes around here. All these facilities that are available for funding. Outdoor trails, motocross or whatever they call those kids on 4-wheeler things. All right, National Park Service. I think about the National Park Service, I'm thinking about Mount Rushmore or Big Bend, but they have local grant programs to promote parks and recreation in our local communities. And I don't even begin to know all the details of it. I just took a screenshot off their webpage. There are multiple programs. This is just 2 examples. There are Save America's Treasures grants and the Paul Brune Historic Restoration Grant. That's just 2 of many different specific grants. They've got programs on there for just about every historically underutilized community that there is. So check that out. This one blows my mind. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Yes, you can do things with EPA grants. They're not just here as a watchdog to get you in trouble because you violated some environmental or pollution law. They've got a program called Smart Growth. This is an example of a trail that was improved with funding from an EPA grant. And this next one will really blow you away. This is Frisco, Texas. I don't know the details of it. If Nancy was still in the room, she had to step out for I think an interview. She could probably tell us the details of this. But this is the Frisco Legacy Town Center, and it was funded in part with a grant from the EPA. That's all I know. But I mean, that's enough to tell me this is something I ought to be looking into and trying to figure out how we can take advantage of this program for our community and our region. Now, everybody's heard about city and county hotel occupancy taxes. The cities are commonly known about, the counties are not. Not all of our counties have a hotel occupancy tax, but some of them do, and the ones that don't have the opportunity to enact one. It's not just a given. You don't just say, we're on a hotel tax, we got it. The city can do that, and I think most all of them have, but a county's got to go get a bill passed in the legislature to authorize that county to enact the hotel occupancy tax. And so if you happen to have a community that's interested in doing that, I did that when I was county judge, and I had a little bit of insight, and you want to work with the hotel industry to help you get it done. Because if you don't, they'll kill it in the legislature, and you'll never know it. But if you work with them, and you show them that what you're doing is truly to promote tourism and put bodies in beds of those local hotels, they will help you get it done. And it can be used for all sorts of tourism promotion. Now, again, people are more familiar with city economic development programs and tourism programs. And some of our counties, most of them are aware of this now because I spent a few years traveling around the state preaching it to them. But counties have broad authority to support economic development and tourism activities. Now, most of them don't dedicate a lot of money to that. Most of them don't really dedicate any money to that, but the beautiful thing is there's money available that doesn't have to come out of the local tax fund. Local Government Code Chapter 381 is what authorizes counties to do economic development, including tourism, and they can do anything they want to do. It says right here, in the beauty of this Chapter 381, it's only about this long. Most state laws are, page after page after page of what you can't do, and they're authorized to do a lot of stuff without a whole lot of rules and regulations, which is good, makes it easier to accomplish things. Here's one source of funding that hopefully your county's taking advantage of. I didn't know about this until I got elected county judge, and it's like somebody told me one day, electric cooperatives, I don't know how this works, but I used to live on an electric co-op and I moved into town, so I was a member. I probably left some capital credits built up in my account. Somehow or another that gets transferred to the state controller on some periodic basis, and the controller is holding money for not all, but many counties in the state of Texas that are unclaimed capital credits from electric cooperatives. And in July of every year, the county simply needs to write a letter to the controller and say, we wish to be paid all of the unclaimed capital credits due to us from electric cooperatives. One year they may get $500, the next year they may get $5,000. I think one year we got $20,000 or $30-something thousand. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason about how much it is, but it's just a source of money that is mentioned in Chapter 381 that can specifically be used for tourism promotion and other economic development activities. So everybody ought to be making sure your county's taking advantage of that, because it's, as we say, free money as if there's anything free. All right, I talked about these key points. I'm gonna land this plane and see if you got questions. I want to come back to connect your dots, and then I've added another bullet point here about being cool. When I talk about connecting your dots, I'm talking about coordination of assets within your community and within the region. And I'll give you one example. And again, my examples are from my own life, but I think it's like this in many small communities. In Crockett, Texas, we're known for historic homes. We've got a County Historical Commission museum inside the old restored railroad depot in Crockett. We've got the Downs Aldridge historic home that was built in 18-something and other, and it's one of the best examples of East Lake Victorian architecture in the state of Texas. We've got the Monroe Crook home that was built by a nephew of President James Monroe, and it's right there on the El Camino Real in downtown Crockett, and it's beautiful. Well, if you ask me when can you go see these, I can't tell you, because one of them will be open Saturday for 3 or 4 hours, and one may be open Wednesday afternoon for 2 hours, and maybe somebody volunteers to go down and sit at one of the homes on Sunday. There's no coordination. People need to know. You don't have to be open 24/7, but people need to know when you're open, and they all need to be open at the same time. And if you say you're going to be open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from noon to 6 p.m., then by George, you need to figure out a way to be open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from noon to 6 p.m. We've got to coordinate because, and I'm not knocking these folks, they're all run by volunteers. Bless their hearts, they pour their hearts into these things. But each one has its own little program and they do what they can do, and somebody's got to step up and be the champion to bring these folks together and coordinate their schedules and activities and cross-promote so that when you go visit one, they're going to encourage you to go visit the others. That's what I'm talking about, coordination. I know I had some other examples. I think I made notes here on some of these examples of how to better coordinate. Connect your dots. Number one, you got to be brutally honest. I mean, with yourself and with your community, and you need to try to view your assets from the eyes of a stranger just coming into town. Because what we're proud of at home, because we know we put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it, may or may not be impressive to that family that's driving up from Houston for a softball tournament this weekend. So you can't afford to not be brutally honest with yourself. That doesn't mean that every asset in your community is not important, but there are certain ones that will appeal to those visitors more so than others. So my suggestion is figure out what those are, what your key, and I would use the word authentic assets are. And when I say authentic, maybe I own an art gallery, and maybe it's the best art gallery in the state of Texas. Well, it's probably going to be popular. But if people can come into my art gallery and meet and interact with the artist, then that's authentic. And so look for authentic assets, unique to your community if possible, and focus in on a small group of those top ones that just hit it out of the ballpark, and then cross-promote everything else while you're at it. My phone keeps cutting off, so I've got to... Okay, I made a note, put the H back in tourism. Anybody want to guess what H stands for? There you go. You know, I liken this back, this is probably 40 years ago. And Rusk, Texas is outside of the Deep East Texas region, so I can talk about them. I love high school sports, and I used to be in the radio business, and I broadcast a lot of high school ball games, and I never will forget driving up to a gas station in Rusk, Texas, and asking where the high school football field was. And the people at the gas station didn't know. And I don't know, that just got off on me to the point that 40 years later, I'm still talking about it. But we got to have hospitality, and I mean, it's one thing to be friendly, but we need our frontline folks, and when I say a frontline folks, it may be somebody that works in the hospitality industry, and it may just be a retail store clerk or a citizen walking their dog down the street that a tourist comes into contact with. We got to make people knowledgeable about what our resources are and know how to guide visitors when they come to our community. And I'm going to tell you, we have something. I used to say, you're welcome to steal this if you want to, because I've used it in some regional promotions. One of our greatest assets in Deep East Texas is people that are friendly to a fault. And if I'm lying, I'm dying. I've had more than one, when I was county judge and we tried to promote tourism, we've declared ourselves the gateway to the Texas forest country. I've had more than one couples tell me that moved to Crockett from Houston or somewhere else where they retired and moved. Why did you choose Crockett? Well, I'll tell you. We just knew we wanted to get out of Houston. We don't have any relatives anywhere. We didn't know where we were going. We just kind of started going out on day trips, 2 hours out of Houston. And we would just stop and get out and look around. And the one thing that we noticed here that we didn't get other places, people were nice to us everywhere. But when we walked down the street in downtown Crockett, people walked up to us and engaged us in conversation. They didn't just smile and nod and go on. So those people who are friendly to a fault, that truly is a great asset. And hospitality cannot be overstated, the importance of it. We want to bring the whole family to town. So we need a multi-pronged approach, because what dad likes to do and what mom likes to do and what the kids want to do may be three different things entirely. You know, you may come to town for a softball tournament, and mom, or baseball, or volleyball, or whatever it may be. And, you know, mom may be lured away to go spend 3 hours shopping on the town square, or go look at some of these historic sites. Dad may be more interested in outdoors, recreation. I mean, you know, do you realize in our region alone, there are only 4 national forests in Texas, and they're all in deep East Texas. Now, one of them overlaps a little bit. Sam Houston Forest overlaps a little into Montgomery and Walker counties, but the 4 national forests in Texas are right here in our backyard, and they are tremendous recreational opportunities. I'm not a fisherman because I never could catch a fish when I was a kid, and so I didn't get in. And we do what we're good at, and I'm not good at it. But do you know that the 3 largest reservoirs in Texas are Lake Livingston, Lake San Rayburn, and Toledo Bend, not in that order? I mean, the assets we have here, and so we need to figure out a way to, because there are people who just care about hunting and fishing and outdoors. And there are people who don't give a rip about that, but some of those people are married to one another. And so we've got to figure out a way to connect our assets in town with the natural assets outdoors in the vicinity. And maybe that's paddling canoes up and down the Neches River or doing something else, but there are great opportunities there. And I've got to wrap up. Let's see if there's one more point I really want to make. Parking. Don't forget about parking. And you know, you cannot overdo parking, because the people who work in the stores need a place to park too. And I've seen towns try to keep employees from parking in prized parking spaces. It's almost impossible. So you just got to be sure you provide convenient parking for everybody. And there's some of these grants that can do that as well. We need cohesive marketing. We need better signage. I get frustrated. I mean, there ought to be signs. We should never have to look at this, Google Maps or anything else. We ought to have good enough signs where you just point me to a place and let me read the signs and get around to where I need to go, either highway signs or just signs for pedestrians as well. And then finally, I want to close with be cool. You know, I said the same things that bring new jobs and other economic development in communities, same things that bring tourism, bring the other things. I don't know how you identify or put a label on this, but the cool factor. We got to make our communities and our region a cool place that people want to be. Fredericksburg is a cool place. People like to go there. Some of them like to sip wine. I'm not a wine sipper myself, but I still like to go to Fredericksburg and watch the other people sip wine and walk up and down the streets and people watch. This gave me an excuse to put my granddaughter up here. Her name is Lily. She's 8 months old. She's a miracle baby. Her mom had COVID pneumonia when she was born. Her mom's a miracle mom. And this is the coolest little thing right here. And I mean, doesn't it make you just want to go pick her up and hug her? That's what we got to do in our communities for tourism. We got to make them so cool that people cannot stay away. And that probably involves asking some young people some stuff that, you know, because they don't think like we do. They frustrate the fool out of me a lot of times. But, you know, we're only going to be here on this earth for a certain amount of time. And hopefully what we're doing right now is something that's going to make life a little better for our grandkids and their kids. And on a kind of a similar note, I would just close by saying, we've missed lots of opportunities in Deep East Texas because things look too big. We can't do that. Oh, I wish we could do that. We can't do that. Oh, man, you know how much money that's going to take? We can't do that. We've got to get over that. I've been guilty of that myself most of my life because I like to think I'm an outside-the-box thinker and I'm, trying to be progressive, but I'm still a cautious person and generally a conservative person, and so I'm not much of a risk taker. But you get to the point that you got to get started. And broadband is an example I'm going to use for this. We're working on a big broadband initiative. It's bigger than everybody in this room put together. Deep East Texas Council of Governments 4 years ago, nobody thought anything would come of it. I didn't know if anything would come out of it. It terrified me. But I finally became convinced we got to do something. And we can't wait until we think we know all the answers and we have all the pieces to the puzzle to get started. Otherwise, we'll never get started. Same thing with tourism. I'm going to tell you an idea I have, again, Crockett, Texas, but maybe this is spur an idea somewhere else. We don't take advantage of the name Davy Crockett like we should. We've got the Davy Crockett National Forest. We've got the Davy Crockett Memorial Park. We've got the Davy Crockett Spring where he camped on his way to the Alamo. Do you know that, well, what other name other than Davy Crockett? I believe you could go to any school in Japan today, probably any school in Europe, half of Russia, Mexico, Central America, and you say Davy Crockett, and every single person knows who you're talking about. I mean, could there be a better name identification than Davy Crockett? Yet we don't take advantage of that tie-in. And so I had a dream. This was when I was a Chamber of Commerce president about 35 years ago, and I went to the then county judge, who was a friend of mine, and a commissioner, because I thought, somebody's got to do this, and they just couldn't see the value of it. But back at that, probably cost 10 times more now, but back at that time, I got in touch with the people in Tennessee, with the Tennessee State Historical Commission, and I got plans, or they told me I could get the plans they had just restored the log cabin where Davy Crockett was born. And I thought, well, we ought to have that in Crockett. I know it's not the original, but we ought to build a replica. And we're not going to lie about it. We'll tell people this is an exact replica of the log cabin and at that time, which was probably back in the late 80s, it was going to cost, if I remember right, $86,000 to get the same company that restored the original cabin in Tennessee to cut down logs from around that area, build the cabin, disassemble it, bring it to Crockett, Texas, and set it back up. And I'm like, what a tourist attraction. David Addicks, who built the huge Sam Houston statue, where he wanted to put his second statue? Crockett, Texas. I went to a meeting at the First National Bank Community Room years ago. Everybody was so pumped up and excited. Now, it's a lot of money. He's going to do the work for free, but we had to raise $1 million, probably $2 million now, but then it was $1 million for the base to support Davy Crockett, who would have been about 2 or 3 inches shorter than Sam Houston, but that's okay. We'd have put him on a higher elevation. It had been taller. Everybody left that meeting all excited. And then what happened? Same thing that always happened. Some of the folks around town started talking, well, $1 million, that's a lot of money. We can't do that. But we've got a local sculptor in this town, and who was very, very talented, and a friend of mine, and a wonderful, wonderful person who's no longer living. Why don't we just get him to make our own statue? We can do that for a lot less. And so they designed, and it never got made. He ended up with a small-scale model of it, but if it had ever been completed, it was going to be life-size of Davy Crockett with a horse. And that would have been awesome. But it wouldn't have been in the league with Sam Houston down there on I-45 in Huntsville. And it's still not too late. We could still get Davy Crockett if we can get people fired up enough to do it. And I know every community has probably got stories like that, so I'm not picking on mine. But we have missed so many opportunities because we think something's just too big and we can't do that. We gotta go home and find the champions in our community that aren't afraid to knock on doors and ask for help and think outside the box and get things done. And that's it. I know I took more than 15 minutes, but I appreciate y'all listening to me.